Gentlemen, we have called you together to inform you that we are going to overthrow the United States government. You still think that jet fuel brought down the World Trade Center? Does anybody else see a problem here? If the government has nothing to hide, why are they so afraid to answer a few questions? This story does not add up.
I want to tell you about a few of the things that I have learned during these last 5 years of intensive research. Perhaps the most startling thing that I can share with you is that all of the conspiracy theories that you've ever heard about one world government, about the UN takeover of the world, all of those conspiracies have now been laid to rest. There's nothing conspiratorial about it. A few of the things that they wish to do. Create a world-standing army under the day-to-day command of, who else? The UN Secretary General. They recommend the creation of a new Economic Security Council, a unified worldwide banking scheme, currency. I have been challenged on the radio and in audiences like this, Mr. Lamb, there's no such thing as a global agenda. Hey, friend, you're absolutely wrong. Here it is. It's called Agenda 21. Agenda 21. The primary document presented in Rio de Janeiro and adopted by more than 100 heads of state, including George Bush, which lays out in intricate detail all of the transformation that must take place in society in order for it to become sustainable as they define sustainability.
Nothing really new, but it's picking up steam and it's building momentum in certain circles. The worst part is you may not even be aware of it, but groundwork is being laid. One of the main reasons for these same old tired ideas being revitalized is because those pushing globalism and government control on a global level have mastered the art of hiding it in plain sight and then just dismissing it as a joke. Their great example would be this: the United Nations Earth Summit, Agenda 21. Now, it has been adopted by more than 178 governments. I believe there's only 191 on the planet. Reading through the pages, it becomes clear sustainable development is just a really nice way of saying centralized control over all of human life on planet Earth.
And living conditions will be intolerable. The droughts will be so bad there'll be no more corn growing. Not doing it is suicide. Just like dropping bombs on each other, nuclear weapons is suicide. So we've got to stop doing the two suicidal things, which are hanging on to our nuclear weapons
and global.
And then after that, we've got to stabilize the population. When I was born, there were
so what's wrong with the population? I mean,
with too many people.
Thank you, Laura.
Rick, what does population stabilization mean, and how do you seek to enforce that?
Well, we're not the epigones of Malta, as some would have you believe, but the world population is a concern. Our concern is about American population growth and, of course, California. With 37 million people in California today, going to be 60 million people in the next 2 to 3 decades.
So you have no idea. Rick, I can't. This is driving me crazy. You're driving me crazy.
Our idea
you have a plan, Rick? You're spouting off things from an office in California. This is my question. You're saying something very controversial here, and I hope people understand what you're saying. You think there should be fewer people in the United States? Force the borders, yes. Don't use words like population stabilization. I get very protective over people living. I appreciate it, though. You're a stand-up guy to join us, and funny man Mike Myers.
For everyone here tonight not familiar with Agenda 21,
I would suggest that this is the beginning of your learning curve, not the end. In 1992, former President of the United States, George Bush Sr. said, "Effective execution of Agenda 21 will require a profound reorientation of human society, unlike anything the world has ever experienced. And it must become clear that Agenda 21 is about controlling every aspect of our lives. How we eat, what we eat, how much we eat, how we move around, food production, the amount of food, and where we even live." Dixie Ray, former Washington State Governor and Assistant Secretary for Oceans and International Environmental and Scientific Affairs, stated, "Agenda 21 seeks to establish a mechanism for transferring the wealth from citizens to the third world. Fear of environmental crisis would be used to create a world government and UN central direction. Participating in a UN advocated planning process would very likely bring out many of the conspiracy fixated groups and individuals in our society." And here we are. This segment of our society, who fear one world government and UN invasion, through which our individual freedoms will be stripped away, would actively work to defeat any elected official who joined the conspiracy by undertaking Agenda 21. So we will call our process something else. We will call it comprehensive planning, or growth management, or smart growth. We ended up with sustainable development. This government has been working overtime to take away our rights to common law through many pieces of legislation. This coming year, I promise you, you will also hear debate over a number of pieces of legislation that will further erode our common law rights. And you have to get behind me on this, ladies and gentlemen, to stop this from going through. As Agenda 21 became more and more apparent to me, I began using the line in Parliament that government was now declaring war on its own citizens. And that goes back as far as 2008. This, of course, led me to being labelled a conspiracy theorist. But here we are now, openly talking about Agenda 21 and the ramifications we will see in a short period of time if this is not stopped in its tracks.
Coming up, if you don't live in a major metro area, you might want to pack your bags. Years ago, moving to the suburbs was a sign that you were making a better life for yourself and your family. But our next guest details a government report suggesting there may be a long-term plan to change all that for you. The effort to, quote, Manhattanize America. Next. Well, if you live in the suburbs, don't get too comfy. Our next guest says the Obama administration has plans to push Americans slowly but surely out of the burbs and into the big cities.
Now to a controversial bill resurfacing in Congress. The FEMA camp bill allows the government to run at least 6 military installations when a national emergency is declared. These emergency centers would be run by FEMA under the command of the Secretary of Homeland Security. Okay, interesting. You know, we have this map that shows how the U.S. would be divided in the event of an emergency, if we can pull that out there. There it is. So this is how the U.S. will be divided into districts. You see 10 of them there. This is according to the National Emergency Center establishment.
Effectively, the U.S. has been cordoned off into these different districts. And so these new emergency centers will be spread out throughout the United States in most of these eventually. And it gives FEMA and the Department of Homeland Security jurisdiction over what goes on in these places during a time of emergency.
Particularly to hear President Obama claim the power to keep people in prison indefinitely with no charges against them, no conviction, no sentence, just imprisonment.
It's important to note here that this document was created in 2010. Which was under the Obama administration. And it predates the NDAA of 2012, which authorized military detainment of U.S. citizens. This clearly shows a long-term agenda at work. It was created in 2010, however, it's just been recently leaked to the public via the internet. The document outlines military procedures for internment and resettlement of civilians, and it describes the layout and the administration of these internment camps. It clearly states on page 38 that it applies within U.S. territory, and it specifically addresses the detainment of U.S. citizens, as is indicated by the identification procedures for new prisoners on page 146, which states that social security numbers are to be recorded alongside their photograph and fingerprints. Included in the list of organizations which may be involved in these internment operations are the Department of Homeland Security, FEMA, the Department of Defense, and the United Nations. On page 260 it shows the basic layout for a facility focusing on detainment. It is depicted with interrogation areas, tribunal areas, and mortuaries. Each detainment facility is designed to hold 4,000 prisoners, and they are depicted with multiple levels of barbed wire separating compartments within the facilities, with a double barbed wire fence enclosing them, and watched over by 24 guard towers. Now, if there's any question whether these plans are active or just theoretical, this should be settled by the fact that the U.S. Army has been running ads for job positions in these camps since 2009, and apparently, they're still hiring.
The FEMA plans to imprison American citizens have generated a lot of interest around the country in locating the potential prison camps throughout the country. These may be facilities currently being used as prisons, such as those you saw earlier, or prisons that are being built supposedly in the name of the war on drugs, or facilities that have other uses but which could be quickly used to detain large numbers of people, such as this Amtrak facility in Beech Grove, Indiana. We're standing now in the main parking lot, which doesn't look too sinister. At this level, it is a very large parking lot, fenced on all sides by fence topped by barbed wire. It also has these electronically operated turnstiles.
The Rules Committee is going to meet in the House. They are going to come up with a rule that makes it okay for them to do a same-day bill. So they'll pass this rule. It's, believe it or not, called martial law.
This last week, the U.S. Congress passed a bill which repeals posse comitatus, which means that we have now institutionalized and codified martial law. Right now, the battle against terrorism involves all of us. Everybody in this country is a potential terrorist.
Senator Dan Inouye, who was the chairman of the Iran-Contra hearings, cut him off, said that deals with very sensitive classified information. We can't talk about it. And it was never really discussed. And there's been articles about it. And I began to learn a few months ago that this database, which some people now call Main Core, is still in existence and actually is being used by U.S. intelligence agencies as a way to keep track of Americans and also run names. Apparently it holds all kinds of information around on millions of Americans. There was an article recently also in Radar magazine where they said 8 million names are in this database. And what I've been told is that the database still exists. Of course, it was still created for martial law circumstances and in a period of absolute crisis in the United States where there would be sort of military government in place in different parts of the country.
Fine, but it was never meant that we would have this gigantic police force from the federal government. I mean, we had martial law up there, FBI and all these agents coming in and closing things down, going to people's houses. It's criminal that that people tolerated this so much, that we tolerated this martial law and total acceptance that they can come into our houses and we can't even go out of the house. You know, what if we wanted to go to the store and get a bread? Oh, no, you can't do that. And yet, you know, yes, it was serious. It was a crisis. There were 3 people killed. But, you know, we have 48 murders every single day. There's a lot of murderers out there. Do we close down cities because there's 10 murders over the weekend in Chicago? We don't do that. But here we close down a whole city, not even allowed to go to a baseball game. I mean, I think it's very, very scary when I look at some of those pictures that happen up in Boston.
Yeah, this is our garage right now.